Ray. Hope everyone's doing well today. And of course, we're here once again to continue our reading Kwame Nkrumah's account of the coup d'etat of 24th February 1966. And he describes the situation prior, during, and days, weeks, and months after the illegal seizure of power in the nation of Ghana. Now, we're going to continue on here. We're going with chapter 4. It's entitled Opposition Elements. So, President Nkrumah goes into the oppositions that confronted him in Ghana. We're going to go about 30 minutes or so and see where we are at this point. This chapter 4, is one of the lengthier ones, so we're not going to finish it all in one session, but we'll go ahead and see what happens at the 30-minute mark. If we feel inclined to continue on past 30 minutes, we'll do so. If not, we'll close it up at that point or a little bit over that time mark. Okay, so now we're here on page 52, chapter 4, and Osajifo continues like so. The members of the old opposition, with whom the NLC are closely associated, are the same people who tried to sabotage the winning of our political independence 10 years ago. They struck on 24th February 1966, just as we were about to break through and win our economic independence. In January 1966, we had inaugurated the first electricity from the Volta Dam, and only 3 days before their treachery, I had signed a new agreement to irrigate the mighty Accra Plains. Ghana was all set for a tremendous march forward into a new industrial era and a great expansion in our food growing capacity. This was a moment for which we had worked so hard. And this was the time this small group of unpatriotic, selfish men, egged on by their neo-colonialist masters, chose to strike. They shouted from the rooftops that they had acted spontaneously to save Ghana from quote-unquote economic chaos. But as everyone who has studied the history of Ghana over the last 15 years or so knows, their actions was only the culmination of a whole series of actions aimed against my government and against myself. They have a long record of go-slow policies, of subversive activity, and of alignment with imperialists and their agents. Unable to gain victory at the polls, they even resorted to assassination plots in order to impose themselves on the people of Ghana and to avenge their political defeat. It is these same people who became members of the political committee set up by the NLC in June 1966. Nearly all were supporters of the former United Party and amorphous group of people who for various reasons opposed my government. The chairman of the political committee, Edward Akufo-Addo, was a well-known member of the United Party. Kofi Busia, deputy chairman, was its leader. Like their Sandhurst counterparts, these members of the civilian political committee are deeply imbued with British traditions. Most of them received at least part of their education in Britain. They returned to their native country as if in blinkers, seeing and judging everything in Oxbridge terms. They saw the liberation struggle as a movement to be conducted slowly and respectfully by themselves, the professional and intellectual elite, and as having nothing to do with the toiling masses whom they regarded with a mixture of fear and scorn. It was men such as these, George Grant, J.P. Dankwa, Ofori Atta, Akufo-Addo, Akil Ag, and Obitensby Lamptey, who were the nucleus of the United Gold Coast Convention, the UGCC, the organization I launched in Salt Pond on 29th December 1947 to achieve independence by quote-unquote all legitimate and constitutional means. Danquah, a vice president of the UGCC, was one of the original supporters of the unpopular Burns Constitution. In fact, right from the start, the UGCC lacked popular support, and it was partly in order to make it appear a movement of the people that I was invited to become its general secretary. I had then spent 10 years studying in the USA and was in England taking up further studies at the London School of Economics and at University College, but spending a large part of my time at the West African National Secretariat and the West African Students Union. These are organizations dedicated to the achievement of West African unity and the liquidation of colonialism. I also spent a lot of time helping to organize the Colonial Workers Association of Great Britain. Danquah wrote personally to me, urging me to accept the appointment. I was at first reluctant, having heard that the promoters of the UGCC were out of touch with the people and were mainly middle-class reactionary lawyers and budding capitalists with whom, with my revolutionary background, I would be completely out of sympathy. But on the advice of the West African National Secretariat, I agreed and returned home on 16th December 1947 after an absence of 12 years. Within 18 months of my return, I was compelled to disassociate myself from the slow-moving and restricted UGCC and to form a new party, the Convention People's Party. This party, based on support of the broad masses of the people and of the youth, demanded self-government now. Unlike the UGCC, which asked for self-government within the shortest possible time, I proclaimed the formation of the CPP before a crowd of some 60,000 people at Cross Stadium on 12 June 1949. The leaders of the UGCC never forgave me. They became implacable opponents of the party, determined to obstruct its program at every stage and to attack me personally on all possible occasions. They showed their hand almost immediately after the birth of the party, when I was summoned to appear before a special meeting of the Ga State Council, the Accra Traditional Local Authority, to explain what I meant by positive action. Ex-members of the working committee of the UGCC were there in force at the meeting and pressed to have me banished from Accra. They blamed me for what they described as a growing lawlessness in the country, though what they really feared was the evidence of the political awakening of the people. I explained to the meeting that at that particular stage of our struggle, positive action entailed nonviolent methods such as press campaigns, strikes, boycotts, and other forms of non-cooperation. That very night, I wrote and printed on my little cropper machine a pamphlet called What I Mean by Positive Action, so that there should be no doubt in anyone's mind about the legitimate and constitutional means by which we intended at that time to attack the forces of imperialism in the country. Should the Kuzi report on constitutional reform, which was about to be published, prove unsatisfactory, it was this cropper machine which was used to print the Accra Evening News. But my long-standing political opponents chose to invent their own interpretation of what I mean by positive action, and labeled me a dangerous rabble-rouser advocating violence. As expected, the Kuzi report published at the end of October 1949 was completely unsatisfactory. I therefore called together the representatives of over 50 national organizations to meet in the Ghana People's Representative Assembly on 20th November to oppose the report and to decide on effective action. The Assembly resolved that the Kuzi report and His Majesty's government statement thereto are unacceptable to the country as a whole, and declared that the people of the Gold Coast be granted immediate self-government. With typical lack of concern for the country's progress, the executive committee of the UGCC did not attend the assembly. And afterwards, the chief at Didawa, led by Nana Ofori-Atta II, stated that they did not accept the views of the assembly. Later, when I had launched the campaign for positive action, it was really beginning to take effect. The Joint Provincial Council of Chiefs joined with the colonial government in attempting to suppress the campaign. At a meeting of the Joint Provincial Council of Chiefs, I explained the need to continue positive action until the rank and file of the people were permitted through the election of a constituent assembly to express their views on constitutional reform. It was like speaking to a brick wall. Dankwa's declaration that those who go against constitutional authority must expect to pay with their neck sums up the defeatist attitude of these people and explains how they never managed to lead a genuine and popular liberation movement. Instead of supporting the efforts of the man in the street to express himself and to bring pressure to bear on the imperialists, these political opponents of the party ranged themselves on the side of the British colonial government in trying to suppress the great upsurge of nationalism. They condoned and even assisted in a wave of arrests of key supporters of the party and leaders in the campaign of positive action. Cujo Posillo, General Secretary of the party, was arrested on 17 January 1950. My own arrest followed shortly afterwards. I was sentenced to a total of 3 years imprisonment, 2 years for attempting to coerce the government of the Gold Coast by launching the campaign of positive action, and the 3rd year for sedition as publisher of the Daily Mail, in which a seditious article had appeared. In fact, I only served 14 months. In the general election of 8th February 1951, the party won a sweeping victory, and I was elected as member of the Legislative Assembly for Accra Central. The colonial government had no choice but to release me. I left prison on 12 February on the request of the governor of the Gold Coast, Sir Charles Arden Clark, formed the government and became leader of government business. At once, I proclaimed that our great task was to press ahead with the struggle for self-government now. And once again, members of the opposition went into action to try to wreck the independence movement. Disgruntled at the success of the party in the general election and disappointed at not receiving positions in the new government, they proceeded to try to cause confusion and discontent among the people by announcing that now we had landed ourselves good jobs, we had forsaken the policy of self-government now. I challenged our political opponents to join us in a campaign of positive action in order to achieve self-government now. I invited Dankwa, Lamptey, and the executive of the UGCC, Olino Bossman, and the executive of the National Democratic Party, chiefs of the Asante Council, Nana Ofori-Atta I, president of the Joint Provincial Council and chiefs of that council, Kobina Siki, and the executive of the Aborigines Right Protection Society, all our critics, to notify the General Secretary of the party in conference to plan a nationwide campaign of positive action if the British government rejected the motion for self-government now. The sincerity of our political opponents and their connivance with the colonial government may be judged by the fact that not one of them answered that challenge. A few years later, after the 1954 general election, When the party won 72 out of the 104 seats in the Legislative Assembly, the largest anti-government party was the Northern People's Party, which had 12 seats. The remaining 20 opposition members were mostly independents, several of whom later attached themselves to one party or another. The anti-government members of the Assembly did not then constitute an opposition in the accepted sense of the term, since there was no group among them capable of forming an alternative government. They were therefore recognized as simply a body of critics of my government and unofficial opposition. Before long, however, the members of the unofficial opposition decided to amalgamate and to form a single party, the National Liberation Movement. The reader will note the close analogy in the name NLM and the NLC, both of which had about as little to do with liberation as it is possible to imagine. The circumstances which led to the formation of the NLM illustrate its reactionary nature to its negative policies, and its negative policies. It was formed shortly after the introduction of the Cocoa Duty and Development Funds Amendment Bill into the Assembly in August 1954. The purpose of the bill was to fix the price paid to cocoa farmers at 72 shillings a load, which is about 62 pounds, for 4 years, the duration of that assembly. This measure was needed to avoid inflation. Demand for cocoa in the world market had far exceeded the supply, and the price had risen to a record height. If the price paid locally to the farmers was increased proportionally, our development plan would be jeopardized by the inevitable rise in prices of consumer goods, which would be followed by a demand for wage and salary increases. My government, therefore, under the terms of the proposed bill, guaranteed to pay the cocoa farmers 72 shillings a load, irrespective of how low the world price of cocoa might fall during the ensuing 4 years, and to use any funds that accrued to expand the economy of the country as a whole. The cocoa farmers, in general, reacted favorably to the bill, but our political opponents seized the opportunity of fanning tribal and regional friction in order to attack us. All the remnants of various parties which had been formed at one time or another in opposition to my government joined together in the Council for Higher Cocoa Prices. This organization, however, did not last long, and it was succeeded by the National Liberation Movement, which adopted as its reason for existence the demand for a federal form of government. By linking the cocoa question with the idea of federation, members of the NLM tried to spread discontent throughout Ashante. They alleged that the cocoa bill was unjust to the cocoa farmers, and that Ashante would be better off managing its own affairs and spending all of the income from cocoa within Ashante instead of contributing to the general development of the country. In this campaign to spread discontent and disunity, the NLM was assisted by the Ashante Council, headed by the Ashante. For a time, there was much violence in Ashante, and hundreds of Ashante party members were forced to take refuge in Accra and other parts of the country. At that time, as on former and later occasions, the imperialist press supported the opposition and gave an entirely false impression of the state of the country. The object was to spread the idea that my policies were causing widespread bloodshed and that we were not ready for independence. Already, the opposition had become very dependent on imperialist support. Hold on for a second. earpiece fell out. All right, let's continue. The object was to spread the idea that my policies were causing widespread bloodshed and that we were not ready for independence. Already, the opposition had become very dependent on imperialist support and therefore deeply implicated in its policies. They had a common interest in trying to undermine my government and to prevent the successful implementation of its political, economic, and social program. It was no mere coincidence that the first attempt to be made on my life occurred while the trouble in Ashante, stirred up by the opposition, was at its height. It took place on the evening of 10th November, 1955, while I was working at home. There were 2 large explosions which shattered all the windows, but no one was injured. I learned afterwards that enough gilganite was used to have destroyed the house entirely and to have killed everyone in it, but that it had been inadequately prepared and badly placed. The police made half-hearted inquiries, and no arrests were made. During the next few months, the opposition stepped up its agitation for a federal form of government, though it is doubtful if they could sincerely have thought this suitable in a country of nearly 100,000 square miles with a population then of under 6 million. However, full consideration was given to their demand and every effort was made to reach an understanding. The leaders of the NLM were invited by 4 members of the Legislative Assembly, 2 of whom represented constituencies in Kumasi, to discuss the matter at a roundtable conference. They refused on the ground that the suggestion did not come directly from the government. I, therefore, sent an official government invitation. This they refused. In the hope that they might change their mind, I sent yet another invitation. They turned it down once again. I introduced a motion in the Assembly on 5th April 1955, calling for the appointment of a select committee to examine the whole question of the suitability of a federal system of government. Although the opposition was entitled to have only 2 members on the committee, as against 7 from the government benches, I agreed to allow them to nominate 5. In spite of this concession, the leader of the opposition declared they would not cooperate, and he and his 20 supporters walked out of the assembly just after the motion had been seconded. The excuse they gave for boycotting the select committee was a strange one. They said that they did not consider the committee competent to deal with national matters, and this regardless of the fact that it was composed entirely of members from the National Legislative Assembly. The select committee, consisting of 12 members, including the chairman C.H. Chapman, the deputy speaker held 22 meetings and considered 299 written memoranda and 60 other written statements before issuing its support on 26 July, in which it advised against a federal form of government. It recommended that regional councils should be set up to which certain powers and functions of the central government should be delegated. The opposition, still dissatisfied, determined to try to delay the independence issue indefinitely by continuing to oppose everything the government proposed. Whenever the question of the Constitution was raised in the Assembly, they walked out. Undoubtedly, they gained much encouragement to persist in their obstructionist attitude by the support they obtained from the British government and press, which, although paying lip service to democracy, has always in Africa, where it suited their interests, shown far more concern for minority rights than for the rights of the majority. Much publicity was given to the unrest in Ashante and to opposition views, the subject being discussed at length in both houses of Parliament, but practically no publicity or sympathy was shown for the wishes of the overwhelming majority of the people of the Gold Coast, who had demonstrated quite clearly that they supported the party and a unitary form of government. In a further effort to dissolve the constitutional issue, I asked for and received a mandate from the Legislative Assembly to invite the British government to send a constitutional advisor to help formulate a suitable constitution and to advise on the devolution of certain powers to the regions. Sir Frederick Bourne was sent. For nearly 3 months, he traveled in every part of the country and discussed constitutional problems with every organization and individual who wished to see him. But when he visited Comanche to meet the leaders of the NLM and their supporters, he found that they did not wish to see him. The excuse for their unwillingness to take part on any discussion on the Constitution was that the government had, in November 1955, passed the State Council Ashante Amendment Bill. This bill permitted those chiefs who had been de-stewed by the Ashante Men Council the right to appeal to the governor. Several chiefs had been de-stewed in Ashante by the Ashante Men Council for no other reason that they were supporters of the government and against the Federalist idea. Under the then existing laws, they had no right of appeal. Clearly, this was a matter which needed attention, and the State Council's bill was designed to put an end to this victimization. Sir Frederick Bourne, in his report, recommended the devolution of certain powers and functions to the regional assemblies, but that all legislation should be enacted by the central authority. I thereupon convened a conference of all the principal representative bodies and organizations in the country to meet at Archimota on 16th February 1956 to discuss Bourne's report and other matters affecting the form of constitution. Once again, the NLM and its allies refused to participate. The conference was adjourned for a week to enable delegates from the Joint Provincial Council of Chiefs to persuade them to attend, but their mission failed. The delegates tried again later, but were still unsuccessful in getting the opposition elements to participate. The result was that although the conference agreed almost of all the recommendations of Sir Frederick Bourne, its findings were not acceptable to the British Secretary of State as providing the necessary conditions for the granting of a firm date of independence. Since the NLM had not taken part of their discussions, this was the case. Once more, the old alliance of the opposition and the imperialists had demonstrated their common interest in trying to delay independence. I therefore drew up my own constitutional proposals for the sovereign and independent state of Ghana and put them before the Assembly on 15th May 1956. The motion was debated and passed on 5th June, after which the Assembly was dissolved and a general election declared to take place in July. The British Secretary of State gave the pledge. If a general election is held, Her Majesty's government will be ready to accept a motion calling for independence within the Commonwealth, passed by a reasonable majority of a newly elected legislature, and then to declare a firm date for attainment of their purpose. The election was to be the final test of opinion for or against the Federation. The outcome would show just how much or how little support the political opponents of the party really had in the country. The result was decisive. The party won 71 seats, increased later by the support of one of the independents, which gave a majority of 40 in the Legislative Assembly. Unlike the NLM, the party won seats throughout the country as a whole, and was the only party which could claim to speak in a national sense. Even in Ashante, then the stronghold of the NLM, the party won 8 of the 21 seats and received 43% of the votes cast, an increase on the previous election. So we'll stop there, and we will take this up. Once again, I'll be back to continue the 4th chapter, opposition elements. Hope you enjoyed this so far. Please, before you go, give a like and let me hear your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you very much. Until next time.